So I'll start with some thank yous, actually, for the Gardener Supply Company for sponsoring this, for Vermont Public Radio for hosting it, for KidsGardening.org for collaborating with us. They are the education specialists in the group here. And I'm Charlie Nardozzi, as I mentioned. I am a garden consultant. I've been working in the gardening industry for about 30 years. I've written books. I have a radio show on Vermont Public Radio called All Things Gardening. I have 2 other radio shows in the region and a TV show. But I also do a lot of consulting. And one of the areas I've been doing consulting in for a number of years is kids gardening, working with teachers, working with kids and parents on setting up gardens in schools and in different educational settings. But I don't want to promote myself as the gardening specialist. That's my co-host's job. And that would be Sarah Pounders, who is the educational specialist with Kids Gardening. Sarah, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, my name is Sarah Pounders. I'm an education specialist with Kids Gardening, as Charlie mentioned, which is a national nonprofit. And our mission is to really just get people excited about gardening with their kids and give you the resources and ideas to get started. Charlie, thank you so much for asking us to be here today. And we have gotten so much interest and so many more people looking at gardening with their kids, and a lot of new time gardeners, especially this spring as things have changed and you're spending more time at home and just even inside, things you can do inside. So it's really exciting to have this chance to kind of talk about these different things. And also, we're going to show you some different live activities too. In addition to myself, my colleague Christine Gall is joining us through some pre-recorded demonstrations that were taken live in the garden. So you're going to get to go a little outside and see some hands-on activities tonight too, because that's why you're here, is to learn about hands-on activities, not just to see the 2 of us talk. So we're excited to be able to share that with you tonight too. And so those are kind of be interspersed throughout the night. So I thought maybe, Charlie, we could kick this off and you could share, like, there's so many great benefits to gardening with kids. And I know both of us have gardened with our own kids. We've both gardened with schools. Do you have some of those favorite benefits that you really think are the reason why you like gardening with kids so much?
Well, gardening always has struck me as kind of like an open door to the whole appreciation for the natural world. That's kind of how I got into it as a kid. And I see so many kids in schools and educational settings. And by doing gardening, all of a sudden, it kind of wakes them up to plants and insects and animals and the atmosphere and weather and all these different things. So I think when you start gardening as a young child, you gain an appreciation for the natural world that extends right into adulthood.
That is very true. That is a great one. So, and I think an appreciation for nutrition is one of the, the health benefits for fruits and vegetables, to see how much work it goes into getting your fruits and vegetables and growing them. So it kind of goes along with that, jumping in and learning the benefits of a garden that way. So what you eat.
Yes, exactly. And in the classroom, you probably have heard these many times yourself too. In classrooms, there's always some children that just have a hard time learning in a traditional educational setting. But when you take them into a garden setting and start transferring some of those academic skills into the garden, all of a sudden they seem to kind of blossom. They really like that hands-on experiential work that happens in the garden, and they take responsibility for things, and they're a better team player, and they really kind of blossom in the garden. I'm sure you've seen that happen in many cases in the work you've done, Sarah.
Yes, we hear that all the time because it's hands-on, it's practical, it applies to their life, and it's a great, just teaching tool for all different subject matters. It doesn't have to just be science. You can teach reading, math, social studies, all sorts of subjects. And especially now when a lot of people are teaching from home, sometimes through remote and working with the school district and teaching from home. But we've got tons of emails coming from parents and grandparents, and this is a tool they can use for hands-on to continue that at home too. So great learning tool.
Yeah, and that brings up a good point. These videos we're going to show and all the educational materials that you're going to get as a follow-up to being a part of this presentation really is geared not just to teachers and parents, but grandparents, caregivers, anyone working with kids. Because gardening with kids is something that is not just an academic thing, but it is a lifelong passion that hopefully gets cultivated with them. And you bring up a good point about the studying. Kids these days spend a lot of time in front of the screen. And we all know that that's not a great thing to do that, to spend a lot of time in front of the screen. And so one of the nice things about kids gardening is it gets them away from the screen, out into nature. But it also, I notice, physically it's great just being outdoors and moving around and getting some exercise, but mentally it's nice because when you're in the garden, and you probably know this if you're gardeners, you slow down. Everything just kind of slows down a little bit. You take time to notice some details. You take a little breath. You get a little more involved in what's going on around you. A lot of times on the screen, you get so ramped up just kind of doing your activities, you kind of forget all of that. And so that I always think is, in this age, what's going on right now, a real important component to kids gardening.
Yes, definitely. And we recently did a survey of our audience asking about their favorite benefits of gardening. And the two words we heard most were that a garden provided joy and calming. And so we got the answers calm and joy in the middle of a pandemic. I thought that was a great indicator of the power of gardens and what it can offer, just that break from everything that's going around you and watching nature and how it all evolves. Right. And so it really is a great, and right now we're getting some questions about gardens kind of looked at as kind of a spring and summer kind of activity. But what do you think about that, Charlie? What do you think?
It depends on where you are. I'm up in Vermont. And so a lot of people think the gardening season is kind of wrapping up early September, but really you can grow a lot of things still outdoors in a garden or in a container right through October. And if you're a little further south or a little further west, maybe even extending beyond that. So this time of year, you could be planting greens, for example, like lettuces and spinach and kale in containers and growing them up big enough so you can eat them. And as you know, and you'll find out from one of our videos, you can eat greens at almost any stage, which is kind of fun. But you can also grow root crops like carrots and radishes and beets. And even if you don't get those roots to form, you can try some of those fast maturing varieties, but even if you don't get the roots to form, you can eat the greens. So one fun thing to do with your kid is eat carrot greens, eat radish greens, watch the expression on their face, like, ooh, tastes like a carrot. But you're in Houston, Texas, so it's a little bit different down there, Sarah.
Yeah, we're actually just getting back into the garden season. We take a break over the summer because it's so hot that nobody wants to be outside. So right. we have great times gardening in the fall and also in the early spring. But we also really like indoor garden ideas too. So you don't need a garden physically to actually do gardening activities. And so I just kind of made a few of my kids' favorites so I could kind of demonstrate. Good. So first of all, one of the things that we always have on hand are dried beans. So just from the grocery store aisle, we always have dried beans on hand. And we do little root viewers. I don't know if y'all can see that. So it's a piece of construction paper and a paper towel and just a clear plastic cup, which can be used over and over again. You can just wash it. And these are my little beans that are starting to grow up. And there's lots of different ways to do that. I like doing it with this cup because then they can grow all the way up and you can get leaves and they get pretty tall. Now they don't transplant very well into a garden because they've been grown in a paper towel, but they're a lot of fun to watch. So when my kids were really young, we just had a constant rotation of these growing. And also we played with the seeds too, like sorting them and making art with them. And so that was definitely one of my go-tos. And I asked my kids for tonight, I was like, what is your favorite garden activity I've ever made you do? And so, probably a lot. And so this is what they both said. This is like a little homemade, we call them plant pals. So it's a little piece of pantyhose and it has soil stuffed inside. And this is annual ryegrass up here for the hair. So you just open up the pantyhose, you put some ryegrass in there, stuff some soil in, you tie a knot. We usually throw some eyes on it. Sometimes when they were really young, we would put like bows in their hair and they can give them haircuts. And by far, this is everybody's favorite. So when I asked, what was their favorite activity that we've ever done? And this is the same at our school garden. I also work at the school garden that my kids go to. And this is the favorite for when the kids see me coming with the pantyhose, they get very excited because they all know what it is now.
And that's a great example. Both of those are things you could do without even having a garden. So if you're in an apartment or you just don't have any outdoor space, you could do lots of gardening activities like that. And I would love to see a little mohawk on the top of his head. That's really cute.
You could do that, ponytails, all sorts of stuff. And it, like I said, you don't even need a window really. They grow pretty well even without much light. So, but our first video actually, Charlie, is from Christine, and she's got even more ideas that she's going to show for what we call kitchen scrap gardening. So more ideas of what you can do without a garden.
Hey everybody, it's Christine, and I want to share a really simple and easy activity that you can do without having a garden or without even buying seeds. This activity is called kitchen scrap gardening. Essentially, the next time you're preparing a snack or a meal, instead of throwing away your food scraps, you can use those materials to create new plants. There are a couple different ways that you can do this, and I want to show you 3 different ways. In the first, we are going to force new top growth from root vegetables. So today I have a carrot, but you could use a beet. You could also use things like turnips or parsnips. But what you're gonna do is chop off the head end of your root vegetable, and you're gonna leave a couple inches of the root. I'm gonna be using a regular knife to do this, but there are a handful of child-appropriate cutting implements that you can use if you're working with kids. And these can cut through carrots and some of the other things that we're gonna be chopping up today. So, I'm gonna chop off the head end of my carrot, leaving a little bit of the root, just like this. Next, I'm gonna need a shallow container. And if you have any small rocks or pebbles, it can be great to add them to your container. Essentially, by putting those things in there, it'll help cradle the root vegetable, which you're gently gonna place in the container. Next, you're gonna add a little bit of water so that it comes halfway up the root. At this point, you're all ready to put your container in a nice, warm, sunny place. After about a week or so, or 2, you might start to see some new growth. It won't be down on this orange carrot end. It'll actually be up here. All these leafy greens will start to regrow. You can eat those by themselves, or you can add them as a nice, tasty garnish to a salad. So that's our first way to approach kitchen scrap gardening. Another way you can approach this growing project is by using tubers, so things like sweet potatoes or potatoes. If you happen to have any potatoes that have been lying around your kitchen for a little bit too long, you might notice that they start growing something called eyes. If you see these on a potato, this is a perfect candidate for using for kitchen scrap gardening. What you're gonna do is chop your potato into a couple pieces, making sure that there's at least one eye on each piece. You can take this and then place it in a large container filled with soil, or if you happen to have a garden, you can bury it in an in-ground bed or even a raised beds like the ones behind me. After a bit of time, this piece of potato will start to sprout. And unlike our carrots from before, where you only got at least one part of a new plant, for this, you're gonna get an entirely new potato plant that will hopefully produce a big harvest for you. All right, the final way that we can approach kitchen scrap gardening is simply by reusing seeds from the fruits and vegetables that we might have in our kitchen. We can do this with big seeds, like avocado pits. This one has been sitting in water and has actually sprouted a root, which you can see right here. If you don't have big seeds, you can also use small seeds, like seeds from citrus fruits or tomatoes. And if you aren't interested in investing the time to grow a whole new plant, it can be fun to use seeds in simple observational activities. For example, you can create something called a seed viewer. To make a seed viewer, all you need is a clear container, something like a plastic bag or even a plastic cup, a paper towel that you're gonna get wet, and some seeds. I like to use dry beans because I always just happen to have them in my pantry. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get my paper towel a little bit wet. I want to make sure that the entire thing is wet. And then I'm going to add it to my container. And I'm going to add my seeds in there as well. The moisture from the wet paper towel will help these seeds germinate. And what it can be fun to do is take a look at your seed viewer every few days, or even every day if you want. You can take observations using words or a kind of drawings in a journal, but keep track of the changes that you notice. And after a week, you'll find that your seeds have actually sprouted. I have one right here that I started a week or so ago, and you can see how the roots have come out of my bean, and it can be really fun to keep track of that growth. So that's all we have for kitchen scrap gardening. If you have any questions about that activity or are interested in learning about other growing projects, you can check out kidsgardening.org.
Wow, that was great. Thank you, Christine. You know, that reminds me when I saw her doing the seeds there of my stepson. When he was younger, we put some citrus seeds in a container and grew a little citrus tree. I don't know what it was, orange or grapefruit. But the thing that stood out for me is that, 10 years down the road, we're still growing it as a houseplant. He still remembered that he was the one who planted that citrus tree. So even these little activities you could do at home can really leave an impression with your child.
Yeah, and citrus is a lot of fun. I started some pepper seeds. These are just some bell peppers in a paper towel. And we had a question come through about the seed viewer that I had shown off. It was about the construction paper, why I had the construction paper around there. And that really is just to show off the roots. So like Christine in her video was showing, she just had a paper towel in a plastic bag, and you can totally do it that way. I just like to use the piece of construction paper just so I can see the roots a little bit better, because since they're white, sometimes they get lost in the paper towel. So right. That just answering that question that came up, clarifies it's not, the construction paper is not necessary for the experiment. So good totally in addition. So Charlie, if people want to take this a step further, they want to do a little bit more gardening, what would you suggest from your gardening expertise they do next?
Well, I think the next step would be container gardening. And this could be great for someone who just has a balcony or a little porch, a little deck, or even has a yard, but just wants to start really small and make it really easy and efficient. Container gardening is fun because you can really play around with it. For a container, you can use almost anything. It could be an old shoe. It could be an old colander, a watering can, an old hat, my hat maybe, as long as it has some holes in it, which this one doesn't right now, so it can drain the water out and it's strong enough to hold the soil. That's all you really need. But if you really want to do it so that it'll be a little longer lasting, you can do the fun part too. You can get these UV stabilized plastic containers, and these are the ones you tend to find in garden centers now. They're great. Some of them are self-watering, so you don't have to water as much, but you can also find clay pots and metal pots and wooden pots too that you can use as a container. So if you're just starting out with container gardening, I would say get a container that's kind of like the Goldilocks thing, not too little, not too big, something in between. A big one would be nice because you can plant a lot more things, but it's harder to move around. The little one kind of limits you with how much you can plant. So if you have, say, a 16 or an 18-inch diameter container, that might be nice to really start out with. Then as far as what you put in the container, you want to use potting soil. You don't want to use garden soil or straight compost. You want to use potting soil because it's formulated so that you can get good water and air drainage down into the pot so the roots can grow of that container. And then, of course, the advantage of having a container, especially on a deck or a patio, is that you can move it around to a sunny spot. You could put it somewhere if adverse weather is coming, it's getting cool, there's going to be a thunderstorm, that kind of thing is happening. And the best part about it is that kids can watch it too. You can put it on a table out there, and every morning they can come out while they're having their breakfast and look out and see what's new in that container. So there's lots of advantages to using container gardening. And I know you've done some different things with your kids, Sarah.
I have. We've had a lot of different types of container gardens over the years because we don't have very much sun in our yard. So we are those people that move them around. And actually we bought like a little furniture dolly thing, and then we just stuck it, a plastic one, we stuck it under one of our pots. And the great thing about them is that they're not permanent plants all the time. I mean, we even have some fruit trees in containers actually that we move around to protect them. But my daughter really liked anything blooming. So we did a blooming pollinator garden. So we had some milkweed and we had some cosmos and we had, salvias. We had all sorts of different things And she just loved anything blooming. We could change things out, and it could move it around to where the sun was at the different times of year. And it was just it felt accomplishable for me when she was really young, because it didn't feel so overwhelming. And my son, we also started him with a container garden. His first container garden actually was just soil.
Got to start somewhere.
I was going to say the plants just never could stay quite in there. So but he enjoyed digging, and he would find little pieces of stuff all around the yard, and he would stick it in. He loved to dig and dig and dig, and he loved to water. So container gardens, that's great. You got to make sure that you have, like you mentioned, the soil is really important because you want good drainage. And you want to make sure that at the same time, you want to make sure it doesn't dry out too fast too, for those days that so much is going on that you can't remember. But I love containers. One of my favorite school garden programs actually is a container garden. They use 5-gallon buckets. It's called Cylinder Gardening down in Houston. And it's a great, it's easy to get started because it doesn't have to be too expensive. And you can move it around, and you can change it out and plant seasonal plants in it. So. Yeah,
and you bring up a good point about your son watering and liking to water. At this age, and we're talking about young kids, 5, 6, 7-year-old children, you really want to encourage them to be involved in the garden, even if it means it's maybe not the best thing to do for the plant. Because the important thing is to really get them hooked on the idea of being in the garden and doing gardening activities. Certainly, it'd be nice to make sure you end up getting some lettuce, some beans, some tomatoes, some flowers, whatever it is. But you also don't want to get so strict about it that you're like, no, stop watering, no more watering, because they're having fun playing in there, because it's a plaything at this point. And we want to encourage that playfulness in the garden.
Yeah, that exploration. In fact, pretty much always we would have to have a change of clothes after gardening.
Exactly.
There was usually, we had our own gardening clothes and had to change out there. So let's see. So I think we actually have another great idea from Christine for container gardens. And so we will flip over to this next video of some container garden ideas.
Hey folks, it's Christine again, and I want to teach you a little bit about how to grow microgreens. Microgreens are great because they don't require a lot of effort, you don't need a lot of space, and you also don't need many materials. So really they're a perfect choice for a beginner gardener, or for folks who might not have access to a traditional garden space, or even kind of an outdoor growing space. You can simply grow microgreens in small containers, and then you'll be well on your way to having your own container garden. So, microgreens are essentially small vegetables, small greens that grow to about 2 to 3 inches tall. You can grow traditional leafy green varieties like lettuce, arugula, kale, chard, but then you can also try growing broccoli or cabbage or even beets as microgreens. You can purchase special microgreen variations of these varieties at a garden store or on an online seed catalog. But in a pinch, you can also simply use normal seeds if that's all you have. And that's what I'm going to use today. We're going to be planting some salad bowl blend lettuce, and we're hopefully going to get some microgreens in the near future. So to start, you're going to need a shallow container. I have these microgreens in a growing flat, but you can also use an old takeout container or something like a big foil kind of chafing dish. Now, you have an option right off the bat. If you want, you can poke some drainage holes in the bottom of your container, but you're going to want to make sure you have something that you can place under this container to capture any water. Drainage holes definitely help make sure that your soil doesn't get saturated, but they aren't 100% necessary. So this growing flat, it doesn't have any drainage holes in the bottom of it, and I haven't had any issues with moisture. So once you've decided if you want drainage holes or not, we're going to fill our container with soil. I like to use a pre-moistened seed starting mix. When I say pre-moistened, I just mean that I've added a bunch of water to the soil so that it's not super dry. I'm going to fill up my container almost all the way to the top, but I don't want it overflowing. Now I can add my seeds. Lettuce seeds are really small, so instead of making hundreds of tiny little holes for each seed, you can simply take a handful and spread them very gently and evenly across the surface of the soil. Once I have all my seeds added, I want to make sure they get covered. So I'm just going to take one more handful of soil and sprinkle it evenly on top. From here, I can gently pat down the soil so that there's good contact between my seeds and my seed starting mix. Next, it's time for me to water. Watering right after you've planted seeds can help start the germination process. Using a watering can that has a spigot like this means that you're going to get a pretty concentrated jet of water coming out. So if you have something that has a sprinkler head on it, or if you have a little misting bottle, that can be better for watering your microgreens. If you don't have either of those, it's really easy to create a very gentle flow of water using some plastic containers. You can poke holes in the bottom of a plastic container like this, or if you happen to have any old kind of little pots for plants that already have holes in the bottom, you can simply hold that over your container and then add your water, and you get a nice gentle stream coming down underneath. Once your microgreens are watered, they're ready to be put in a nice sunny place. You're going to want to make sure that the soil stays moist throughout the growing process, and in about a week or so, you'll get microgreens that look about this big. You're going to want to wait until they're 2 to 3 inches tall though before you harvest. And when that time comes, you can simply use scissors to snip the stem right above the soil surface. Now, if you have any more questions about microgreens or want tips on how to grow other vegetables, you can check out kidsgardening.org.
That was great. It's fun to grow microgreens. It reminds me of my sister-in-law, who has a rack, you know, one of those wire racks that you get at the home centers for shelving, basically. And it has, I think, 4 shelves on it. And she uses the same thing Christine uses, that seed starting big tray. And she puts some soil in there, puts her seeds in there, and she rotates them around. So she has these growing in her kitchen, which is not near a window, doesn't have any supplemental light, just in the kitchen itself, in this tower that she has, and she grows them year round. And this is in Vermont, where it's cold. And they get a little leggy at times, especially in the winter, but it doesn't really matter because when you're snipping them, you're going to be harvesting them and they'll still be good to eat. So microgreens are great. You know, all these lettuces and greens that we're talking about are great to grow with kids because you don't need a lot of success. You know, you just need them to get them to germinate, get them up, get a couple leaves out, and then it's like, ooh, let's eat them. Let's eat them. So you can eat them.
I love.
Go ahead.
Okay. I just love being able to have ideas for people so they don't feel like gardening is like a huge, you know, commitment or just huge expense. So just to get started and just to show how even something simple you don't need all the different inputs or, you know, bright light, and still you can have harvest. So
yeah,
it's
and
exciting.
You can have something to eat. Yeah, exactly. And you know what you could do with these microgreens too is it's actually kind of a seed starting system as well. So say you want to do a container out on a deck or a patio, and you don't want to start from seed there, you can grow your microgreens. When they get a little bit bigger, you can just kind of scoop them out with a spoon, move them over there, put them in the container, and now you've got a little seedling in your container that you can grow to a bigger size while you're eating the microgreens. So there's a lot of different uses for it.
Yes. And do you have other favorite container garden plants that you like?
Oh yeah. So yeah, if you know, what I try to do with containers is to try to maximize the space. So I do what we call succession planting. meaning that I plant something in the spring in this northern climate where it's cold, like a spinach, for example, or a winter hardy lettuce. I'll get that out pretty early where I can protect it because it's in a container. You can move it in at night, that kind of thing. Let those grow up. And then when they're done, say a couple months later, then I can go do a warm season loving plant, like a bean. A bush bean is a good example of that, or basil is another good example. And then leave that in there until around this time of year when they start kind of petering out. And then I take those out and go back to those cool seasons, spinaches and radishes and plants like that. That'll just take me right until it gets too cold for them even then. So having those, you can do these succession plantings with some plants, or you can grow some plants that are really bred to fit in containers. Breeders have done a great job breeding different dwarf varieties of vegetables and herbs right now. And there's one I really like. It's called Tidy Treats. Not quite sure about the name, but Tidy Treats is a little cherry tomato. And it's what we call a dwarf indeterminate. What that really means is that it stays small, about a foot or so tall, but it's indeterminate, meaning that it continues to produce fruit all season long. So unlike a lot of other dwarf tomatoes you get at a garden center or a home center that kind of produce for a while then their end, this one literally produced all summer. So I can show you proof of it. It's in my patio right now. I've been eating cherry tomatoes from it all summer, still am, and it's September. So having plants like that with your kids is great because it's so rewarding. You've got a tomato that's producing all summer. They can just be eating from it as they want all season long. And so Sarah, you must have some favorite plants too.
I do. Well, cherry tomatoes actually are definitely on my list. So I'm going to have to check out this variety. So because they're very happy in a container. And it's just, I love being able to control the soil they're in and the watering, and obviously the treats to, come and snip them as we're walking into the house, just have a couple. So it's very exciting. Another one of my absolute favorites is pansies. I love pansies. They're the best kids gardening plant in my book. And I love just having pots of them all over. And sometimes we'll throw some bulbs in underneath the pansies. So we'll plant some bulbs and have pansies. I know that that depends a lot. So in Texas, like pansies are like a November through March plant. So I know that it's very different up in Vermont.
But it's good for pansies. It's good for people in warmer climates to know that you can have these flowers in the winter that are beautiful to look at and something that your kids can be doing different activities with too. I always like snapdragons. That's a little harder plant probably to grow, but the fun part about snapdragons is you can squeeze the flower and you can make it talk. And that's always fun to do with kids.
Those are a lot of fun too. So anything with color, anything they can pick. My kids love picking flowers. They love getting seeds. Anything that has big seeds that they can harvest off. Just anything they can pick and take pieces out of is great.
Yeah. And again, it goes back to that exploration. At this age, you really just want to encourage kids to be involved in the plant, involved in it. So even if it means they're snipping the plant in half to take something away, it's okay. They're really involved. They're really interested in what's going on. Yeah,
once we, at a school garden I worked with, we actually had a student ask me what would happen if he planted it was a pansy upside down. And so we actually planted a couple pansies with the roots on the top of the soil and the flowers underneath. It was hard to do, but it was a good experiment. And we watched and saw what happened. So only just a couple, for experimental purposes. But those kind of things are really important for kids to feel like they let them go with you to the garden center and pick out what they want to plant, or look at the seed catalogs and what kind of plants. Because what's interesting to them is going to be different by each kid. Like some kids will be really into herbs and like the smells. Some kids will want to eat. Some will just want flowers. So
yeah, really kind of take your cues from what the kids want to do, and of course you have to be. Have to kind of edit a little bit, you might say.
You want them to be successful.
You want to be successful, exactly. So there might be certain things that aren't going to grow very well where you are, but you can kind of direct them, or maybe try some of those things too. But you do want to have some success. You don't want to have things just turning into little brown messes there. Yes. I remember one kid actually asked me, we had planted some, I think it was peas or something had come up in the garden. And then overnight, they just disappeared. And it was a cold night. So the next day he asked me, so what happened to the peas? Did they go back underground because it was too cold? I was like, oh, well, that's a logical thing, right? That's what you and I would do. Like we'd go back into the warm spot. So there's a lot of this kind of innocent inquiry that's going on at this age. And we really want to foster that.
Yeah, and that's the fun part. So. Yeah. So Charlie, if you're going to take a step up from containers, what would you do as a next step?
Next step would be a raised bed. So this, of course, is going to require some land, hopefully a sunny spot somewhere. You don't have to worry about the soil so much because raised beds are really an artificial environment that you're creating. So you can use any kind of material for a raised bed, but the most traditional one, of course, is wood. And you want to get a rot-resistant wood like a cedar or a redwood, something that's going to last a number of years in the garden. You can use metal, though. You can use stones and bricks and pavers and lots of different things that people use to create raised beds. The key, though, is the dimensions of it. So you want to make your raised beds about 8 to 10 inches tall, maybe a little taller if you're going to be building them like on asphalt or on a compacted gravel and impervious surface that doesn't drain very well. Maybe you want to go to about 12 inches, but 8 to 10 is a pretty good standard size. And you want to make the dimensions of the bed about 3 feet in diameter, no wider than 3 feet, because one of the keys to raised bed gardening is that you don't want to step on the bed because you don't want to compact that soil. So, and then it could be as long as you want. You can make it 2 feet, 3 feet, 4 feet, 6 feet, whatever length you want to do. But you want to keep that diameter narrow enough so you can reach in there without stepping on it. Then once you've got your bed built up, some people might want to mow down the grass underneath the bed first of all, or if they have a lot of weeds in there, you might even want to put down some cardboard or something to smother those weeds so they don't grow through. But then you want to put on top of that some kind of soil mix. And that's the beauty of raised beds is you can bring in a real fertile, healthy soil mix. So a mix of compost and topsoil is ideal. Around 50-50 is what I usually recommend. In some places we'll mix it for you. Some places you'll have to buy, 3 bags of compost and 3 bags of topsoil. But whatever it is, try to keep the mix about even and fill it up. And once you have that raised bed filled and you have the bed there in a nice sunny spot, you're all ready to go and you can just start planting. So the advantages of the raised bed is that because it's raised, it'll drain water and warm up faster in the spring, so you can plant sooner. Because it has really fertile soil, you'll be able to plant things a little bit closer together and you won't have to add as much fertilizer. And because you're planting things a little closer together, you'll have less weeds. That's also due to the real fertile soil and healthy soil that you have in there. So it's really a low maintenance way to produce a garden. And you can produce an amazing garden in a 3x6 raised bed, not only for your child, but for your whole family as far as producing food and flowers and herbs.
Yes, raised beds are on my wish list. So
I know, I hear you have raised bed envy.
I do. We have raised beds at our school garden. We have I think we're up to 22 raised beds at the school garden. So, but we don't have any at our house yet, but that's on my goal list to get that. So we especially, at the school, we plant all kinds of different vegetables, and it's just so much easier to bring in the best soil. We have so much, we don't have to fight with the weeds as much. We don't have to worry about the lawnmowers running over them and the weed eaters, or we still get a couple basketballs, that may find a plant or two, but at least it's not kids' feet that are finding it. But it's been great. One of our most successful beds at the school has been pollinator gardens. They're really hardy. Putting in native plants that don't need a ton of extra water. They actually make it through the summer without regular watering. And at our house, we, as I mentioned earlier, we had this pollinator container garden that we started many years ago. And one of the things we had in there was milkweed. And so we've been able to watch the monarchs come through and come back, come through in the spring. They usually come through about early April, come back through. And we've gotten such a population now of them that we need more space. I need some raised beds because I don't have enough room in this little container, and somehow these monarchs keep finding us. So really, really want a raised bed.
Yeah, you need a raised bed. And if you're in a place, there's a few more little things about raised beds. If you're in a place where you have a lot of mice and voles and chipmunks and things gophers tunneling underneath the bed and eating plants in the bed, you can also line the bottom with a hardware cloth. This is kind of a wire mesh you can buy at any hardware store or home center, and that'll stop them from going underneath. And then for on top of the bed, you can get all kinds of different covers using floating row covers or a mesh, even a material like tulle that you can get at a fabric store used to make tutus and wedding veils and things of that nature, that you can cover your bed with. And a lot of plants, especially greens and root crops, won't need to be cross-pollinated, so they'll grow to maturity underneath there. And that, again, is another way to make it a little more successful. Now, with pollinator gardens, that's a great idea. And we see so many schools now doing that. My sister-in-law's school over in Maine put in a pollinator garden that I helped her kind of design and put together. And some of the keys with pollinator gardens, if you want to do something like that at home, is, again, start small and find a nice sunny protected spot in your yard that's maybe away from where the dogs go, where the kids run around and play. You know, try to make the demarcation of garden and play area a little solid. So that's another reason for doing raised beds. That really kind of indicates where the garden is. But with the pollinator garden, you're saying, mentioned growing native plants, and that's really important to do. Because native plants have the pollen and have the nectar that's really important for those bees, those butterflies, the hummingbirds, all the beneficial insects that need that energy and that protein to really evolve and grow well. The other thing you want to keep in mind with a pollinator garden is you want to have color from spring to fall. So choose flowers that'll be blooming in the spring. Annual flowers are really nice, like the zinnias, for example, and the marigolds and the cosmos, plants that'll bloom for a long period of time. Put those in the garden. But the one thing you want to watch out for, if you can, is when you go to the garden center to buy those flowers, make sure you get heirloom or open pollinated varieties. A lot of garden centers are good now. They might say pollinator friendly on the little tag there. You want to look for that variety of those plants, because some of the hybrids, even though they're stunning to look at and bloom all season, they may not have the pollen and nectar that's going to be beneficial to the bees and all the beneficial insects that need them. So make sure you get the right kinds of plants. Also have some water around, maybe a bird bath or something, a little shelter area, some evergreens, or just a spot where some of these pollinators can hide. And then just enjoy it. Just kind of let them spread. You know, I always encourage people not to plant a lot of different plants, but plant groups of the same plant. So a group of black-eyed Susans or bee balm or other kind of daisies or whatever kind of flowers they are, because that's going to attract the pollinators better, and it's going to be easier to manage when you don't have 10 different plants, but maybe 5 different plants in nice big groups. So yeah, pollinator gardens are a great thing to do, and it lends to so many different kinds of gardening activities too.
It does. That is like some of our most popular content. So this fall, we are putting together something we're calling Lessons to Grow By. So we had so many teachers and parents just looking for lessons that could easily be sent off to a distance, or either something that you could kind of wrap into a lesson. So we put that together, and it's all about pollinators for September. So we have all these great ideas for different activities you can do either at home or at school. So we'll have links to that in the email we'll send out after the webinar. But we also have tons and tons of pollinator activities. And we actually, our very last video is of Christine, is one of her doing an activity that is related to pollinator gardens. So, and what other kind of craft activities you might be able to do with that.
Hey everyone, it's Christine here, and I want to share a really fun pollinator themed art project that you can do at home. What we're going to do is create a leaf and flower press out of some assorted materials that are likely just hanging around your house. So to do this, you're going to need some cardboard. You're going to need some newspaper or something called blotting paper. Newspaper will work just fine though if you don't have the latter. You're going to need a belt or some sort of strap, a large rubber band that'll help hold all of our materials together. And then you're going to need some either heavy books, or if you happen to have them, some pieces of kind of wood that are about this size. Any kind of variation of these materials will do. The only materials that we don't have right now are some flowers. So I'm going to go pick some in the garden right now. Once you have your flowers, we're ready to start our activity. One word about flowers though. I've picked a lot of pretty small ones that don't have a lot of volume. These smaller flowers will be able to press and dry nicer in our flower press than larger flowers like marigold or sunflowers. So while you're out on your flower search, do keep that in mind. Now, here's the pretty easy part. We're going to take a piece of cardboard and a piece of newspaper, and we're going to essentially just lie our flowers flat on them. Depending upon how large your piece of cardboard is and how large your piece of newspaper is, you don't need to put all of your flowers on there. If you need to kind of create two different sections, that's also okay. So I'm just gonna start with this for now. I'm gonna take my second piece of newspaper and I'm gonna lay it down on top. So I'm essentially squishing those flowers in between. Then I'm gonna take my second piece of cardboard and do the same. And then I'm gonna sandwich all of this in between my two heavy books. Now is when you need to use your belt or whatever kind of tool that you have to make sure that everything stays secure. What you're trying to do is just make sure that there's as much pressure as possible on those flowers so that they get nice and flat. I'm gonna take my belt. I'm gonna try and tighten it as much as I can. All right, and that is my homemade flower press. I might try and take some additional books to put them on top just to weigh this down a little bit better. And after about 2 weeks, I can come back and take a look inside, and my flowers should be nice and flat and dry. What I can do with them, a whole bunch of stuff. If I want, I can get some Mod Podge and I can kind of paint them on a little piece of paper, a nice piece of cardboard or cardstock, and then you can frame that. You can kind of shellac it on a piece of wood, whatever you choose. Kind of these flowers are yours to do with whatever you want. But if you want some additional inspiration, you can check out kidsgardening.org.
So that was great that Christine showed about how to do those flowers in the flower press too. And I think you have some examples of that, Sarah?
I do have some examples. This is an activity that we do a lot, and it's a fun one to do in the fall. Let me see if I can get them to show up. We do pansies, of course, were the last ones we've done. Let me see if you can see them. So we have lots of different pansies that we have done from our garden. There's a purple one. We also did a few leaves. And it's a great fall activity too. So before you lose everything, before everything kind of freezes over, you can get some pressing done. I usually put mine in old telephone books, or you can even do it just in between tissues. And you can make little crafts, lots of little crafts. So this is a window catcher that we did for Valentine's Day, actually. So my son did this for me. Bookmarks, cards, I'm trying to think. I've done little boxes with the Mod Podge. I mean, just about anything you can put it. Magnets. I've seen magnets done with that. So if before everything, for those of you up north, so for me, I could do it all year round. But up north, before you guys lose everything, go out and pick all those flowers before the first frost hits. Go pick them. And for those of you in the south, it's time you can get lots of fall blooming plants, and it's great for little gifts, like thank you gifts for teachers and all sorts of things.
Yeah, and it's a nice way to encourage kids to decorate the garden too, so they can make all kinds of different creations like you did, like your son did. And those could be things you hang in the garden, hang in the raised beds, or hang on the containers. So again, it creates that sense of ownership of the garden. That this is something that's theirs. It's not just about plants, it's about other things that I can do in the garden. And a lot of times that's a real way to hook your kid into staying involved in the garden, because you're encouraging them to decorate it, to make it something that's a personal expression.
Yes, yeah, definitely. They can have a lot of fun. There's all sorts of activities to do, no matter what size space you have. And we have a lot of ideas on our website. So if people are looking for ideas of things to do, definitely can look on there. We have whole sections on garden activities, things that are a little more advanced with lessons. So lots of different ideas for that. Common household supplies. You don't have to use things that are go out and get things. There's lots of things you can do from the kitchen. We showed you all of those things from the kitchen. So
yeah, and you do have lots of resources for kids of different age groups too. So what's appropriate for an elementary school kid or a middle school kid or a high school kid, so that you're really kind of meeting the child where they are, and that's really a great resource to have.
Yeah, thank you for reminding me of that. So that is one of the articles that we'll send out in the links, is that specifically kind of, it's called Garden by Age. And so you kind of look, so here's what to kind of like what to expect when you're gardening with a kid. So what do you expect when you're gardening with a kid who's 2 or 3 or 4? What you might want to do with a teenager, everything from each age kind of give you some ideas. So make sure to check that out if you're looking to see what might to expect if you're planning.
Yeah. So hopefully these gave you some great ideas of what to do with your child this fall in the garden, whether it be a container garden, indoor gardening. Of course, you could do anywhere year round, no problem. Container gardening you still can do in the north, but as Sarah was saying, you could do that right through the winter in warmer climate areas. And raised beds, well, and pollinator gardens, you could be planting those things now, even in the north. Fall is a good time to plant a lot of perennial flowers. So this could be a time where you get together and you kind of plan things out and do some planting so that next spring, things are coming up and you can start doing some of these fun activities. So I want to thank again our sponsor, Gardener Supply Company, for bringing this Growing Together, Gardening with Kids. Our host, Vermont Public Radio, kidsgardening.org, for giving us Sarah for a whole hour, unbelievable. And Christine for producing those videos, and John Billingsley for being the video production manager of that whole project. So what we'd like to do now is maybe answer a few questions. We have some time left, and see if we can help you out with some specific issues you might have. I know we have one question that came in earlier. It's about a woman actually in Texas, Sarah, who has kids that are afraid of insects. So what do you suggest for something like that?
Well, that is a tough one. I would say that, insects can add interest to the garden, because anytime you have any kind of living thing, that you can see in the garden. So the main thing is to teach them to respect the insects, to keep their distance, to kind of observe with their eyes. And also most of the insects, especially with pollinator gardens, this would come up. As long as you leave them alone, they'll leave you alone, kind of thing. So it's kind of a good lesson for them to feel not afraid. Now, being from Texas, I will say we definitely have some issues with some insects that you may need to take care of, such as fire ants, or there's some wasps that are pretty aggressive. So also that's something that, as an adult, you might need to do a little bit of monitoring and make sure that there's nothing that potentially you could stumble on by accident. And that's another thing, Charlie, you mentioned, that some of the pollinator gardens, you have them in a separate area, not where they're running around with their soccer balls, so that make sure that you don't run into these things by accident. But generally, it's a good way to see the different insects in action, to see how some of them are actually beneficial. Kids love watching the different stages of butterflies. You can watch the ladybugs eat aphids. So, it's just one of those things where you're teaching them to observe, but with their eyes, make sure that they understand how to respect them too. So do you have any other ideas on that? Or?
Well, I'm thinking of butterflies in particular as really kind of a non-threatening kind of insect is fluttering around. And I know a lot of places, a lot of botanical gardens in particular, have butterfly houses where you can go in and have the butterflies all around you. And that might be an experience. Of course, you got to check it out with your kid. But it might be an experience that would kind of initiate them to have a little more closer contact with an insect in a protected environment, in a safe environment. So I think just taking your time with it, a lot of these things, as you know, with children, go through different stages. So it could be in a year or two, that'll all change. And they'll be out there hanging on to earthworms and doing all kinds of crazy things.
Dragonflies are another one. My son absolutely loves watching dragonflies. So they come in all shapes and sizes. So
yeah, they're really fun. Let's see, we've got some more questions here. Ideas for kids who are socially distanced and can't get out in the garden. So that's a good question. What do we do in this age of the pandemic where we're told to stay 6 feet apart and it's hard to kind of do work in the garden? Do you have any tips for them?
We actually have had a lot of conversations with the School Garden Support Organization Network has been really looking into this, like what can we do? As far as getting out into the garden. And so, of course, we gave you some ideas for things that are smaller, container gardens, things you can do at home. But also, there are a lot of community gardens and school gardens that are coming up with ideas for keeping socially distant, such as making sure the kids can have their own tools to use, or to wash the tools in between, coming up with little kits that they go out to the garden with so that they have their own gloves. We've actually seen, spacing them out, the raised bed idea, so you can space kids out, making sure you have the 6 feet. A lot of the gardens that are outside, you actually, they've shown that, being outside in the air where everything is dissipating is actually better than being indoors, if possible. So, and I know but it is hard to get out to a garden right now, but a lot of community gardens and school gardens are really working hard to try and find safe ways to continue gardening. So.
Right. There's sounds like there's a lot of resources out there for you to kind of check in and see. And it kind of goes back to our idea of container gardening, because containers are mobile. So if you have some kind of mobile gardening, you can separate them more. You can make them 6 feet apart so kids can be in one garden and another garden and yet still all be working together.
Right. Those bucket gardens with the handles on them. Those are once again, a great tool.
Yeah. Someone's looking for ideas working with older school kids, middle and high school aged. I mean, I know you have tons of ideas and we don't have that much time, but maybe a couple little tips that might help this person out.
Sure. So for older kids, one of the great things are to let them be in charge, to really let them develop the project and be the project managers. They're really capable of coming up with the ideas. We have some great examples on our website of kids that have started community projects, doing their own outreach. Kids older, like high school kids, working with elementary school kids. So kind of doing a mentorship program. We have some examples we just published an exploring hydroponics curriculum. And we also have a digging into soil curriculum on our website that we're both focused on, that can be good for older kids. So especially digging into soils, it's for high school kids and involves a lot of looking at current events and analyzing data and that kind of thing. So just let them take the lead is the main thing.
Yeah, that is true. And especially some things that they're probably very well versed in, like technology, using their phones, using their smartphones to do different kinds of research and monitoring of the gardens. All that kind of stuff is going to make a lot of sense to them. Probably be easier for them to do than for us to do. So
yeah, there's some great citizen science projects out there. That was a good point, Charlie. So where they can get involved in monitoring insects. There's some pollinator ones actually, as we've been talking about pollinators, so that they can really feel like they're contributing.
Yes, right. They're kind of part of a bigger movement. Let's see if we have time for one more brief call. Let's see. Someone says they dissect deceased bees and examine them under a microscope to remove the fear. That's from Hope Gardens. That's kind of a nice idea, a little suggestion. So we are at an hour, so I do want to stay true to that. We promised you we'd keep this to an hour. So thank you all for coming. I really appreciate the tremendous response we got from not just around this country or this continent, but all around the world, actually. This is being recorded, so this will be available not only for you to watch again, but to share with other people, and we hope you do that. Again, I want to thank Gardener Supply Company, Vermont Public Radio, Sarah, of course, and Kids Gardening. You guys are great. Thank you very much. And hopefully you'll be out there with your kids this fall in the garden doing some of these projects. Don't be shy about it. There's lots of resources out there that'll help you. Start small, keep it simple. Don't really look for the big bang, but just look for some really positive things happening so your child can stay engaged and you can stay engaged with your child in the garden.